I will never forget that rainy Tuesday when Olga's world turned upside down. We were sitting in the kitchen of her old apartment, drinking tea with lemon, and she, still not believing what was happening, was rereading the letter from the notary's office. Her uncle Victor, whose existence she had almost forgotten, had left her his entire fortune, $3 million, an apartment in the center of Moscow, and a country house in the Moscow region. "Can you imagine?" whispered Olga, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yesterday I couldn't fall asleep, thinking about how to pay for Misha's sports club, and today—" She didn't finish. The front door slammed, and Sergei, her husband, entered the kitchen. I immediately noticed how her shoulders tensed. 10 years of marriage, and she still flinched at the sound of his footsteps. "What are we celebrating?" he asked, surveying the table with cookies and cups. Olga silently handed him the letter. I watched his face change, disbelief, surprise, and then something else, something cold and calculating. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, well," he drawled, returning the letter. "So now we're rich." Back then, I didn't yet know that "we" in his understanding didn't include Olga. A week later, when the first installment of the inheritance was deposited into her account, Sergei changed. He started coming home late, smelling of expensive cologne and someone else's perfume. Then came the talks about how the money needed to be properly invested, and that Olga doesn't understand anything about finances. I was visiting them that evening when she refused to re-register the property as joint ownership. Sergei lost highest temper. I had never seen him like that. Face red with rage, veins bulging on his neck, and that look. He looked at her not as if she were his wife, but an enemy. "You've always been a nobody," he shouted. "I've put up with you for 10 years, and now when we finally have money, you're playing at being independent?" Little Misha started crying, hiding behind his mother's back. It was then, looking at the frightened child, that Olga seemed to make some decision for herself. The next day she called me early in the morning. Her voice sounded strangely calm. "He kicked Misha and me out. Said it was his apartment, that he earned money for it while I was taking care of the child. Changed the locks. Virez in our hotel now." I immediately went to them. The hotel turned out to be inexpensive, on the outskirts of the city. Olga was sitting on the edge of the bed, mechanically sorting through the children's things that she had managed to grab in a hurry. Misha was playing with a tattered teddy bear in the corner of the room, occasionally casting worried glances at his mother. "I called a lawyer," Olga said when I sat down beside her. "It turns out the apartment is indeed registered only in Sergei's name. I was so naive. All these years I thought we were a family." Her eyes were dry, but her voice trembled. I put my arm around my friend's shoulders. "What are you going to do?" "First of all, I need to find proper housing. Then—" She paused for a second. "Then I'll take what belongs to Misha and me. Uncle Victor's inheritance is our chance to start a new life." That same day we found them a temporary apartment. The landlady, after hearing Olga's story, even lowered the price. And a week later, when all the formalities with the notary were settled, Olga received the keys to Uncle Victor's Moscow apartment. I helped them move in. The apartment turned out to be spacious, with antique furniture and a view of an old Moscow boulevard. Misha ran from room to room, admiringly touching the carved backs of chairs and examining the paintings on the walls. "It smells like books here," he said, sniffing. "And so meeting Else." "History," Olga replied, running her hand along the spines of books in the enormous bookcase. Uncle Victor was a history professor. On that evening, when Misha fell asleep, we sat on the balcony, wrapped in blankets. Moscow twinkled with lights, and Olga was telling me about her childhood, about rare meetings with her uncle, about how he always told her she was special. "You know, he once told me, 'Olga, never let anyone take away your dignity.'" I didn't understand what he meant then. But now. The phone ring interrupted her. She looked at the screen and sighed. "Sergei. 3rd time today. Will you answer?" "No. Let him communicate through a lawyer." But Sergei wasn't going to give up so easily. The next day he appeared at the entrance of our building with a bouquet of roses and repentance on his face. I was just leaving home when I saw him. "Is Olga home?" he asked, nervously adjusting his shirt collar. I need to talk to her. She doesn't want to see you, Sergei. Listen, he grabbed me by the elbow. I lost my temper. All this inheritance. It went to my head. I love her, truly. And Misha too. We're a family. I freed my hand. Family? You threw them out on the street. It was a momentary weakness. Desperation could be read in his eyes. Help me, please. Tell her I've changed. I looked at him and saw not remorse, but fear of losing access to money. For 10 years he had controlled every step Olga took, and now she was slipping away from his influence. I'll let her know you came by, I said dryly and walked on. In the evening, I told Olga about the meeting. She listened, fidgeting with the pendant on her neck, a gift from Uncle Victor. You know what's strangest? She finally said. I don't feel anything.
No anger, no resentment.
Just relief. As if I've dropped a heavy backpack that I'd been carrying for years. A month later, Sergei filed for divorce, demanding half of the inheritance. His lawyer claimed that property acquired during marriage should be divided equally. But Olga's attorney proved that inheritance is personal property and not subject to division. The court case was difficult. Sergei tried to portray Olga as a bad mother, hinting at her mental instability. But the judge saw through his manipulations. On the day the decision was announced, I held Olga's hand. When the judge ruled that the inheritance would remain entirely hers, with Sergei receiving only visitation rights to their son, I felt her finally relax. It's all over, she whispered, leaving the courtroom. But it was only the beginning. A year after receiving the inheritance, Olga opened a children's educational center in the very country house her uncle had left her. A place where children from troubled families could receive support and knowledge. And she also began to smile. Sincerely, openly, without a shadow of fear in her eyes. And when I watched her giving a tour of the park near the center to new children, I thought about how sometimes inheritance is not just money and property. Sometimes it's an opportunity to regain the freedom and dignity that Uncle Victor spoke about. And perhaps this is exactly what he wanted for his niece. 3 years had passed since Olga's life changed. The educational center was flourishing, accepting more and more children. I often came there on weekends, helped with English lessons, and sometimes just sat on the veranda, watching how Olga transformed this place and the people around it. On one such day, when the autumn sun was gilding the treetops, we were walking along the park alley. Misha ran ahead, collecting colorful leaves for his school project. You know, said Olga, adjusting her scarf, I received a letter from Sergei. I tensed up. After the divorce, he had disappeared from their lives, even stopped coming to meetings with his son. What does he want? He's asking for a meeting. Says he's realized his mistakes, gone through therapy, quit drinking. Olga smirked, but without malice. He wants to rebuild his relationship with Misha. And what do you think? She stopped, watching as her son gathered an armful of maple leaves. I think that Misha has the right to know his father. His real father, not that caricature that Sergei had become in recent years. If he has truly changed. I placed my hand on her shoulder. Are you sure? After everything he did. Olga turned to me. In her eyes, there was no longer that hunted uncertainty that I had seen for years. I'm not doing this for Sergei. I'm doing this for Misha. And... She hesitated, for myself. I want to let go of the past. Truly. We agreed that the first meeting would take place in the cafe at the educational center, where Olga would feel on her own territory. I insisted on being present. I didn't trust Sergei, despite all his assurances. On the appointed day, he arrived 15 minutes early. I watched from the window as he nervously shifted from foot to foot by the entrance, clutching some box in his hands. He had changed, lost weight, grown a beard, and was dressed simply but neatly. No traces of his former polish remained. He's here, I told Olga, who was checking Misha's homework. She nodded, took a deep breath, and called her son, Misha, come. Someone wants to see you. The boy raised his head from his notebook. Who? Dad. Misha froze. For 3 years, He had barely thought about his father, but I had seen how sometimes he would examine the old family photographs that Olga kept in an album. Will he stop shouting? Misha asked quietly. Her heart tightened at this question. Olga knelt before her son and took his hands. If he shouts or does anything you don't like, we'll leave immediately. I promise. The meeting was tense. Sergei was visibly nervous, speaking too quickly, trying to joke, but his jokes came across as awkward. Misha remained wary, staying close to his mother. The box Sergei brought turned out to be a robot construction kit. Misha was interested in robotics. I heard you attend a club, Sergei said, pushing the box toward his son. I thought you might like this. Misha looked at his mother, as if asking for permission. Olga nodded, and the boy carefully pulled the gift toward himself. Thank you, he said quietly. Gradually, the ice began to melt. Misha told about his latest project at school, about his new friends. Sergei listened attentively, asking questions. Not once did he interrupt his son or dismiss his words, as he used to do before. When Misha walked away to look at the aquarium in the corner of the cafe, Sergei turned to Olga. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know you could have refused. I could have, she nodded. But I didn't. You. He hesitated, searching for words. You've changed. In a good way. Olga smiled. Yes, I've changed. And you seem to have changed too. I observed their conversation, ready to intervene at the first signs of manipulation from Sergei. But he really was different, more restrained, attentive. When he spoke about his work as a consultant at an IT company, his words lacked the boastfulness of before. After our divorce, I've reconsidered a lot of things, he said, twirling a cup of cold coffee in his hands. I went through therapy. Turns out I have a bunch of childhood issues I wasn't even aware of. It's not an excuse, of course. But I'm working on myself. Olga studied him thoughtfully. I'm happy for you, Sergei. Really. After that meeting, Sergei started visiting once every 2 weeks. At first, he and Misha would walk in the park near the center, then they began venturing into the city, to museums, exhibitions. Olga always knew where they were and when they would return. Gradually, Misha began looking forward to these meetings, telling his father about his achievements, asking for advice. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace in the living room of Olga's Moscow apartment, she confessed, "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but Sergei has really changed. Misha is flourishing with him. Aren't you afraid it's temporary? That he might return to his previous behavior?" Olga shook her head. I used to be afraid. Not anymore. I'm no longer the woman who can be intimidated or controlled. And if he tries again, I'll simply close this door. Forever. In her voice was the calm confidence of someone who knows their worth. After about 6 months of regular meetings, Sergei asked for a private conversation. We were sitting together, the 3 of us, in the same cafe. Misha was at his classes. I wanted to apologize, he began, looking directly at Olga. To truly apologize for everything I've done. 4 years of control, for throwing you out, for trying to take away your inheritance. For everything. Olga remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I was a terrible husband and father. I manipulated, suppressed, considered you my property. He paused. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just want you to know that I realize what I was like, and I'm sorry. I looked at his face, searching for signs of insincerity, but all I could see was genuine remorse. Thank you for your honesty, Olga replied after a long pause. It means a lot to me. And one more thing, Sergei took a folder with documents from his briefcase. I've transferred the ownership of our old apartment to Misha. It will be his when he grows up. It's the least I can do. Olga took the documents with surprise. You didn't have to. I did, he interrupted. It's the right thing to do. When Sergei left, Olga remained silent for a long time, examining the documents. Do you believe him? I finally asked. I do, she nodded. I didn't believe him right away, but now, yes. People change if they truly want to change. That evening, as we were returning to Moscow, the center was located in the Moscow region, Olga suddenly said, "You know, I recently found Uncle Victor's diary. He wrote about me when I was still a teenager. He wrote that he saw strength in me that I didn't notice myself." He was right, I smiled. Yes, she was looking at the landscape rushing by outside the window. But it took so many years and such an inheritance for me to realize it myself. Sometimes I wonder, what if my uncle hadn't left me anything? Would I have found the strength to leave Sergei? I squeezed her hand. You would have. Sooner or later. She smiled gratefully, perhaps. But you know what I realized? Uncle Victor's real legacy is not money or real estate. It's a chance. A chance to become yourself. 2 more years passed. Olga's educational center had turned into a true island of hope for dozens of children. I started working there full-time, heading the language department. Every day, seeing the happy faces of children, I understood that we were doing something truly important. Misha, now 12 years old, had grown into a confident, open-minded boy. His relationship with his father had strengthened. Sergei didn't miss a single school Olympiad or any important event in his son's life. Olga and Sergei had learned to communicate calmly and respectfully, like adults connected by a shared child and a shared past. On one spring day, when the center was preparing for its annual charity concert, I found Olga in her office sorting through old papers. "What are you looking for?" I asked, sitting down in the chair across from her. "Remember I told you about Uncle Victor's diary?" Olga raised her head from a stack of yellowed notebooks. "I want to find one entry. He wrote about some project he didn't have time to finish. Something connected to our family history." I helped her sort through the papers. Among the letters, photographs and notes, we found a small notebook in a leather binding. On the first page was written, "The Kravtsov family genealogy. Research and materials." "This is it," Olga whispered, carefully turning the pages. Uncle Victor turned out to be not just a history professor. He had spent years gathering information about his ancestors, reconstructing the family tree. The records went back several centuries, to the times of Catherine the Great. "Look," Olga pointed to an entry at the end of the notebook. "He writes about a family heirloom that was passed down through our family from generation to generation. Some kind of medallion that supposedly belonged to our great-great-grandmother Anna Kravtsova. She was a lady-in-waiting at the court." "And where is this heirloom now?" Olga shrugged. "I don't know. Uncle writes that he searched for it for years, but never found it. The last mention of the medallion dates back to 1917, when the family fled from Petrograd." This discovery ignited a new interest in Olga. For the next few weeks, she spent her evenings studying genealogical websites, archival documents, and corresponding with historians. Misha also became fascinated. For his school history project, he decided to present his family's genealogy. One evening, while sorting through old photographs in Uncle Victor's apartment, Misha discovered something interesting. "Mom, look!" he exclaimed, pointing to a photograph that appeared to have been taken in the 1950s. "This is Uncle Victor, isn't it?" In the photograph, young Victor stood next to an elderly woman in a formal dress. Around her neck hung a medallion, oval-shaped, with some kind of pattern. "This could be the very relic," whispered Olga, peering at the picture. "And the woman. This must be his mother, my grandmother Elena. I barely remember her. She died when I was 4. "If the medallion was with your grandmother, where did it go afterward?" asked Misha, curiously examining the photograph. Olga pondered. "I don't know. Perhaps Uncle Victor kept it somewhere here, in the apartment." I'll translate this text into English while preserving the literary style and paragraph structure. We began a methodical search. We checked all the boxes, drawers, and hiding places we could find. Misha displayed a genuine detective talent, tapping on walls and examining floorboards for secret compartments. After a week of fruitless searching, we had almost given up. That's when Olga remembered Uncle Victor's strange habit. He always kept his most valuable possessions in books. "When I visited him as a child, he showed me how he carved hiding places in old books," she explained. "He said it was the most reliable way to hide something because thieves would never check every book in a library." Uncle Victor's library contained several thousand volumes. Checking each book would have been an impossible task. But Olga suggested that if we were talking about a family heirloom, then the book itself must be special. What was most valuable to Uncle Victor? She pondered aloud. History. Family. Roots. And then I remembered, in his study, there's a shelf with books on genealogy. Perhaps we should start there. We went to the study. The shelf with books on genealogy and family history stood out among the others. All books were bound in identical dark blue covers, neatly arranged by year of publication. Misha brought a stepladder, and Olga began methodically checking each book, carefully leafing through the pages, feeling the binding. On the third shelf, in the very corner, stood a book that looked slightly different. Its binding was a shade lighter than the others. Olga carefully took it out. History of Noble Families of the Russian Empire, read the inscription on the spine. The book was heavier than it should have been. Try to open it, suggested Misha, impatiently shifting from one foot to the other. Olga opened the book. Inside, in a carved hollow, lay a medallion, exactly the one we had seen in the photograph. Oval, silver, with an engraved pattern of intertwining lines and the initials AK on the reverse side. We found it, whispered Olga, carefully taking out the medallion. We found it. The medallion turned out to be not just a piece of jewelry, it was a locket that could be opened. Inside was a small portrait of a woman in a court dress and a lock of dark hair tied with a faded blue ribbon. This must be Anna Kravtsova, said Olga, examining the miniature portrait. Our great-great-grandmother. Along with the medallion, there was a note in the hiding place, written in Uncle Victor's hand, to Olga when the time comes. Why hadn't he given her the medallion during his lifetime? Perhaps he was waiting for the right moment, which never came. The discovery of the medallion became the beginning of a new journey. Olga decided to continue Uncle Victor's research, to reconstruct the history of the Kravtsov family. She contacted historians specializing in the genealogy of noble families and organized a trip to St. Petersburg, where her ancestors once lived. In Petersburg, an amazing discovery awaited us. In the Hermitage archives, there were mentions of Anna Kravtsova. She was not just a lady-in-waiting, but a confidant of the Empress, performing delicate assignments. And the medallion, as it turned out, was a gift from Catherine the Great herself for some special service. Can you imagine, Olga said as we were returning to Moscow, a gift from the Empress has been passed down through generations in our family. And now it's mine. What are you going to do with it? I asked. Olga thoughtfully stroked the medallion that she now wore around her neck, to preserve. To study history. And then, when the time comes, to pass it on to Misha. This is our true inheritance. Not money, not real estate, but memory, roots, connection to the past. Upon returning to Moscow, Olga organized a new program at her educational center. A family history club where children learned to create family trees, search for information about their ancestors, and preserve family stories. Every child should know where they come from, she said at the club's opening. It gives strength and confidence, helps to understand who you are. I watched as Olga told the children the story of the medallion, showed them old photographs, taught them to value the past. In such moments, she became remarkably similar to Uncle Victor. The same sparkle in her eyes, the same passion for history, the same desire to pass knowledge to the next generation. Once, when we were sitting in her Moscow apartment, sorting through another batch of archival documents, I asked, "Have you ever wondered why Uncle Victor chose you specifically as his heir? Why not someone from his closer relatives?" Olga put aside the folder with documents and gazed thoughtfully out the window. Evening Moscow was lighting up, and distant memories reflected in her eyes. You know, I've thought about this often. Especially during the first months after receiving the inheritance, when everything seemed so unreal. She touched the medallion on her neck. Now that I've learned more about our family, I'm beginning to understand. She stood up and approached the bookshelf, taking out an old photo album in a worn leather cover. Look, Olga opened the album to a page with a photograph of a young woman with a serious gaze. This is my grandmother, Elena Viktorovna, Uncle Victor's mother. She was also a historian, worked in archives before the war. And she too wore this medallion. I peered at the photograph. Indeed, the same locket was visible around the woman's neck. Uncle Victor told me that in our family, the medallion was never passed to the eldest child or through the male line, as is usually the case with inheritance, but to the one who, in the keeper's opinion, most resembled Anna Kravtsova. Not in appearance, but in character, in spirit. And he saw these qualities in you? I asked, turning the pages of the album. Apparently so. Olga smiled. When I was a child, visiting him during school breaks, he often told me about Anna. About how she was forced to pretend to be weak and dependent at court, although she actually possessed a sharp mind and strong will. How she managed to preserve her dignity in a world of intrigue. How she saved her family during the palace coup. And you also managed, I remarked quietly, to save your family when the time came. Olga thoughtfully nodded. Perhaps Uncle Victor saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. A potential that was waiting for its moment. She closed the album. You know what's most surprising? When I began researching Anna's history, I learned that her husband, my great-great-grandfather, was a complicated man. Domineering, jealous. Anna found a way to live with him while preserving her inner freedom. And then, when he died, she completely transformed her life. I looked at my friend with new understanding, just like you. Yes, Olga laughed softly. Only I was luckier. My husband is alive and it seems has also found his path. At that moment, the phone rang. Olga glanced at the screen. It's Sergei. He and Misha are at the Museum of Modern Art. They want to show me some robot exhibition. After she finished the conversation, I asked, have you never thought? Well, perhaps, of giving him a second chance? As a husband, I mean. Olga shook her head, but without bitterness. No. We've both changed, become better, but some bridges cannot be rebuilt. And that's normal. She paused. You know, I recently met someone. He's a historian, works in the archive where I went looking for information about my family. We've met several times, talked about books, about the past. He's an interesting person. And what's his name, this interesting person? I smiled. Andrei, she blushed slightly. Andrei Sokolov. He invited me to a classical music concert next week. And did you accept? Yes, she nodded. It's time to move on, isn't it? That evening, when we finished sorting through the documents, I lingered in the living room, examining the photographs on the walls. Among them was one taken recently. Olga with Misha against the backdrop of the educational center, both smiling, happy and free. Next to it, an old photograph of Uncle Victor in his study, surrounded by books. Two images, separated by decades, yet united by something elusive. Perhaps that very spirit of Anna Kravtsova that Uncle Victor had recognized in his niece. A few days later, I was helping Olga prepare for the concert. She was nervous, like a teenager before a first date, sorting through outfits, uncertain about her hairstyle. It's just a concert, I tried to reassure her. Not a coronation. I know, she sighed, rejecting yet another dress. It's just that I haven't been on real dates for so long. Sergei and I got married almost right after university, and before him. I can't even remember. It's as if I've forgotten how to be simply a woman, you know. I understood. 10 years of marriage, in which she gradually lost herself, and then 3 years devoted to her son, the center, searching for her roots. There was simply no time left for a personal life. Do you remember what you were like before meeting Sergei? I asked, helping her fasten the dark blue velvet dress we had finally chosen. Olga pondered, vaguely. I think I was dreamy. I loved poetry, theater. I wanted to become an art historian, but then I met Sergei, and he convinced me it wasn't practical. And now? Who are you now? She turned to the mirror, smoothing the folds of her dress. Now I am free, strong. I know what I want. She touched the medallion. I know where I come from and where I'm going. Be that Olga tonight, I said, embracing my friend. Just be yourself. When Andrei came to pick her up, I watched from the window as they met. He gallantly opened the car door for her. She laughed at something he said. They looked right together. Two mature, accomplished individuals ready for a new chapter. Misha was with his father that evening. When I called him before bedtime to make sure everything was all right, a habit remaining from the times when Sergei had just begun rebuilding his relationship with his son, the boy sounded excited. "Aunt Lena, do you know that Mom went on a date?" "I know," I smiled. "And how do you feel about it?" "It's fine," he replied after a pause. "Dad said that Mom deserves to be happy, and if this Andrei is a good person, then that's great." I was surprised by Sergei's maturity. "Your dad really said that?" "Yes," Misha confirmed. "He even offered to meet Andrei if things get serious between him and Mom. Said that adults should be able to communicate for the sake of their children." This was so unlike the former Sergei that I couldn't immediately find a response. Apparently, therapy had really helped him change. Olga returned late, radiant. We agreed that I would stay overnight so she could tell me about the evening. Just like in the good old days when we were students and shared secrets until dawn. "He's amazing," she said, curled up in an armchair with a cup of herbal tea. "You know, not just smart or well-read, there are many like that. He's genuine. He listens as if every word you say matters. And he tells fascinating stories about the people whose archives he studies." "And what did you talk about?" "About everything. About books, music, travels. He was on an expedition to the Solovetsky Islands, studying the monastery archives. He showed me photographs. It's so beautiful there." She paused. "And I told him about the medallion, about our family history. He was so enthusiastic, offered to help with the research. I saw how her eyes were shining. It happens when a person finally meets someone who shares their passion, their values. He invited me to St. Petersburg for the weekend," she added more quietly. "He wants to show me archives where there might be documents about the Kravtsovs." "And you'll go?" "Yes," she nodded, and there was so much determination in this simple gesture that I couldn't help but smile. Misha will spend the weekend with Sergei. They're going to some robotics competition. The trip to St. Petersburg became a turning point. Olga returned not only with new documents about the Kravtsov family but also with a special light in her eyes, the kind that appears when a person has found something important. Or someone. The following months flew by like a single day. Andrei became a frequent guest in Olga's home. At first, Misha regarded him cautiously, but soon warmed up, especially after Andrei helped him with a history project for which the boy received the highest grade. "You know," Misha told me once when we were preparing a surprise for Olga's birthday, "Andrei is nothing like Dad. He never speaks loudly and always asks for my opinion." I nodded, helping him cut out letters for the congratulatory poster. "And how do you feel about that?" "It was strange at first," the boy admitted. "But now I like it. And Mom is happy with him." She laughs. She hardly ever laughed before. From a child's lips, these words sounded piercing. I remembered Olga from the time of her marriage to Sergei, perpetually tense, speaking in a quiet, cautious voice. And the present Olga, a self-confident woman whose laughter now often echoed within the walls of this house. Andrei and Olga's relationship developed unhurriedly, with the thoroughness characteristic of people who have already experienced both the joy and pain of intimacy. They didn't rush, giving each other space and time. Andrei understood that Olga needed to heal old wounds, and she appreciated his patience. One winter evening, as we sat by the fireplace in the country house that had become an educational center, Olga showed me an ancient book that Andrei had found in the archives. "Look," she carefully turned the fragile page. "This is Anna Kravtsova's diary." Andrei discovered it in a private collection, the owner of which agreed to grant us access. I gazed with reverence at the faded lines, written in the elegant handwriting of a woman who had lived 2 centuries ago. "Here she writes about the medallion," Olga pointed to a paragraph. "It turns out Catherine didn't give it to Anna without reason. Anna saved the Empress from a conspiracy after accidentally overhearing the conspirators' conversation. Risking her life, she warned Catherine, who was then able to prevent the coup." "Bravery runs in your family's blood," I remarked. Olga thoughtfully touched the medallion. "You know what's most surprising? In her diary, Anna writes that the medallion isn't just jewelry. Catherine told her it possesses a special power. It protects from misfortune those who remain true to themselves and their principles." Do you believe that? I asked with a slight smile. I don't know, Olga shrugged. But my life changed for the better after the medallion came to me. Maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe. She didn't finish her sentence, but I understood. Sometimes even the most rational people are ready to believe in miracles, especially if they help explain the surprising turns that happen in life. In spring, Andrei proposed to Olga. Not on one knee with a velvet box, as in romantic films, but simply and sincerely, during a walk through the summer garden in St. Petersburg. He didn't give her a diamond ring, but an antique map of Russia from the 18th century, on which places connected to the history of the Kravtsov family were marked. I want to explore them all together with you, he said. If you agree to become my wife. Olga called me that same evening, her voice trembling with excitement. Lena, I said yes. Will you be my maid of honor? They decided to have an intimate wedding, only for the closest people. Olga wanted the ceremony to take place at the estate that Uncle Victor had left her, where her educational center was now located. The wedding preparation turned into a real historical research. Olga decided that the ceremony should include elements of the Kravtsov family traditions. We studied ancient rituals, searched for mentions of wedding customs in diaries and letters. The most difficult part was the conversation with Misha. Olga was worried about how her son would perceive her decision to get married again. But the boy surprised her with his maturity. I'm happy for you, Mom, he said when she nervously told him the news. Andrei is good. And he loves you for real. How do you know? Asked Olga, touched by his words. Misha shrugged with that childlike wisdom that sometimes astonishes adults. He looks at you even when you don't see. And he listens. Dad never did that. Surprisingly, Sergei also responded with dignity. When Olga informed him about the upcoming wedding, he sincerely congratulated her. I'm glad you found your happiness, he said. You deserve it more than anyone. And after a pause, he added, I'm sorry I couldn't give you that happiness back then. On the wedding day, the weather seemed to offer a gift. After a week of rain, a clear, warm day emerged. The estate was drowning in flowers. Guests gathered on the lawn where white chairs and an arch entwined with wildflowers had been arranged. I was helping Olga with her dress. She had chosen not a traditional white gown, but an ivory-colored dress with elements of vintage cut, inspired by the fashion of Catherine the Great's era. Fresh flowers were woven into her hair, and around her neck, of course, was Anna Kravtsova's medallion. Are you nervous? I asked, securing the last flower in her hairstyle. Strangely no, Olga replied, looking at her reflection in the mirror. I feel calm, confident, as if everything is going exactly as it should. There was a gentle knock on the door, and Misha entered, dressed in a formal suit. He was supposed to walk his mother down the aisle, his own idea, one he was very proud of. Mom, you look so beautiful, he said, gazing at her with wide eyes. Like a princess from a storybook. Olga hugged her son, trying not to wrinkle her dress. Thank you, my dear. You look very handsome too. The ceremony was simple and touching. As Misha led Olga to the arch where Andrei was waiting, I noticed tears in the groom's eyes. He looked at them, the woman and the boy who had become his family, with such adoration that it took my breath away. Among the guests was Sergei. Olga had insisted on inviting him, believing it important that Misha's father be part of this day. I observed him during the ceremony. He sat quietly, with a slight sadness in his eyes, but without bitterness or jealousy. When Olga and Andrei exchanged rings, Sergei applauded along with everyone else. At the small reception after the ceremony, something unexpected happened. Andrei asked for the guests' attention and took out a small box. Olga, he said, opening it, I found this in the Hermitage archives. It belonged to the Kravtsov family, and the museum director kindly agreed to return the relic to its rightful heirs. Inside the box lay a signet ring with a coat of arms, the very same one that had been engraved on Anna's medallion. This ring was worn by Anna's husband, Pyotr Kravtsov, explained Andrei. Now both family heirlooms are together again, as they should be. He turned to Misha, and I want you to keep it until you grow up. This is part of your heritage, your history. Misha accepted the small box with reverence, his eyes shining with pride and excitement. I stood next to Olga and saw how she looked at her son and new husband, the two most important men in her life, with such love that it was impossible to express in words. After the ceremony, while the guests were enjoying the festive dinner on the open veranda, I noticed Sergei standing apart by the old oak tree. He was watching Olga dancing with Andrei, and the expression on his face was thoughtful. "Is everything all right?" I asked, approaching him. He smiled a bit sadly, but sincerely, "Yes. Just thinking about how everything could have turned out if I hadn't been such an idiot for 10 years. Do you regret it?" "Of course." He took a sip of champagne. "But looking at her now, I understand that perhaps this is how it was meant to be. She's happy. Truly happy. With him she's so genuine." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Sergei continued after a pause. "I never saw her like this even in our best days. Maybe we just weren't right for each other from the beginning. I couldn't give her what she really needs." "And what does she need, in your opinion?" "Freedom to be yourself." He looked at me with unexpected insight. "I always tried to make her into what I wanted to see. But Andrei simply loves her as she is." At that moment, Misha ran up to us, proudly showing a ring in a small box. "Dad, look what Andrei gave me. It's a real family heirloom." Sergei knelt down to be at eye level with his son and examined the ring carefully. "This is amazing, Misha. A real treasure. You're now the keeper of family history." "Yes." The boy was beaming with pride. "Andrei said that when I grow up, he'll help me study our family's entire history. We'll even go on an expedition to places where the Kravtsovs lived." "That's wonderful." Sergei hugged his son, and I noticed him struggling with his emotions. "I'm very happy for you." I'll translate the text into English while preserving its literary style and structure. When Misha ran off to show the ring to other guests, Sergei straightened up and looked at me with new determination. I thought for a long time that I had lost my family. But now I understand. I simply need to learn how to be a different father and a different ex-husband. Not the one I was before." "You're already different," I said sincerely. "Misha loves you. And Olga. She appreciates your changes." He nodded, and together we returned to the guests. The celebration continued until late night. When most of the guests had left, only the closest company remained. We sat by the fire, kindled in a special place on the estate grounds, and Andrei was telling stories about ancient Russian wedding rituals. In some provinces, there was a custom, he said, holding Olga's hand, when newlyweds on their first wedding night had to find a treasure hidden somewhere in the house by the bride's parents. It was believed that this would bring wealth and prosperity to the family. "We already have a treasure," smiled Olga, touching her medallion. "And our wealth isn't in gold, but in the history behind it." Misha, struggling with sleep but unwilling to miss a minute of this special day, sat between his mother and Andrei, wrapped in a blanket. "Tell me more about Anna Kravtsova," he asked in a sleepy voice. "What was she like?" Andrei looked at Olga, as if asking for permission, and she nodded. "Anna Kravtsova was an extraordinary woman," he began. "At a time when most noblewomen were occupied only with household matters and social entertainments, she was interested in science, art, and politics. Catherine the Great valued her intelligence and often consulted with her on important matters, although officially Anna was merely a lady-in-waiting." "She was like Mom," Misha mumbled drowsily. "Smart and beautiful." Olga gently stroked her son's head, and he finally fell asleep with his head on her lap. "I think it's time to put the young keeper of family relics to bed," Andrei said quietly. He carefully lifted Misha in his arms, and he and Olga headed toward the house. I watched them walk away, a man carrying a sleeping child, and a woman walking beside him, and thought about how wonderfully life unfolds. 3 years ago, Olga was a frightened woman fleeing from her husband with a child and a suitcase of belongings. And today she is a confident mistress of the estate, a newlywed, walking alongside a man who sees and values her true self. A few minutes later, Olga returned alone and sat next to me by the fire. "Misha is asleep," she said. "Andrei stayed to read to him, even though the boy can't hear anymore. He says it's their new ritual." "He will be a wonderful stepfather," I remarked. He already is, Olga smiled, gazing at the fire. You know, today when we were exchanging vows, I felt something strange. As if Uncle Victor was there, among the guests. And she hesitated, as if Anna was with us too. Do you think they would have approved of your choice? I'm certain of it. She touched her medallion. Sometimes I feel like all of this was predetermined. That Uncle Victor left me the inheritance not just by chance, but knowing it would change my life in exactly this way. Have you become a fatalist? I teased her. No, she laughed. Rather, I believe that some threads in the fabric of our lives are stretched from the past. And sometimes, if we are attentive, we can see the pattern that forms across generations. We sat in silence, watching the dying fire. The starry sky spread over the old estate where Uncle Victor once lived, preserving the history of the Kravtsov family, and where now Olga lived, continuing that history. You know what I found yesterday while sorting through the last boxes of my uncle's papers? She asked suddenly. A letter. Addressed to me, but with a note saying, "Open on your wedding day." And what's in it? Olga took out an already opened envelope from the pocket of her dress. Here, listen, dear Olga, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer with you, and you have found your happiness and are preparing to join your life with a worthy person. I always believed that this would happen. When you were a little girl who came to visit me during holidays, I saw in you a reflection of Anna, the same spark in your eyes, the same inner strength that was waiting for its moment. I watched you grow, take your first steps into adulthood, and wanted to protect you from mistakes. But everyone must walk their own path. I leave you not just property and money. I leave you a history, our family history, which I believe will give you strength in difficult times. Anna's medallion is now yours, as is everything I have gathered during my long years of research. Remember, true wealth is not in possessions, but in the ability to remain true to yourself even when the whole world demands otherwise from you. Anna understood this at Catherine's court. I understood this while living my complicated life. Now it is your turn to carry this wisdom forward. Be happy, my dear niece. And know that wherever I may be, I will always be proud of you. With love, your Uncle Victor. Olga finished reading, and I saw tears in her eyes, reflecting the light of the fire. He knew, she whispered. Somehow he knew that everything would turn out exactly this way. I hugged my friend, and we sat like that for a while, listening to the crackling of the coals in the fire. I was thinking about how amazingly my friend's fate had unfolded. Uncle Victor's letter seemed like the final piece of the puzzle that fell into place, completing the picture. He was a visionary, your uncle, I said quietly. Or he just knew you very well. Olga carefully folded the letter and put it back in her dress pocket. You know what's most surprising? When I first received the inheritance, I was completely bewildered. I didn't understand why me, what he wanted from me. But now. She looked around the estate grounds. Now I know for certain that I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. Andrei approached us, stepping noiselessly on the soft grass. Misha is sleeping soundly, he said, sitting down next to Olga. He even put the little box with the ring under his pillow. He won't part with it now, Olga smiled. I showed Uncle Victor's letter to Lena. Andrei nodded. He was a remarkable man. It's a pity I didn't get to meet him. He would have approved of you, Olga said confidently. You're similar in many ways. The same passion for history, the same respect for the past. We sat by the dying fire for a long time. Andrei was telling us about his plans to help Olga expand the educational center by adding a historical component. Workshops on ancient crafts, historical reenactments for children. Can you imagine, he said enthusiastically, children will not just read about the past, but live through it, making candles using old recipes, writing with quill pens, studying noble etiquette. And dressing up in historical costumes, Olga chimed in. I already know someone at the theater who can help create them. I watched them, passionate, making plans, complementing each other's ideas, and realized that they had truly found perfect partners in one another. Not just in love, but in a shared purpose. When the fire had almost burned out, we decided to return to the house. The night air had grown cool, and Andrei thoughtfully draped his jacket over Olga's shoulders. The first night as husband and wife, I whispered to Olga as we climbed the veranda steps. How does it feel? Strange, she admitted with a slight smile. But in a good way. As if I've finally returned home after a long journey. The house was quiet. The last guests had already dispersed to their guest rooms or left. I was also planning to go to my assigned room, but Olga asked me to stay a while longer. There's something I want to show you, she said mysteriously. Andrei, do you mind? He nodded understandingly. Of course. I'll check if everything is all right with Misha in the meantime. Olga led me to Uncle Victor's study, a small room with a massive desk and walls lined with bookshelves. She had preserved this study almost untouched, only adding a few of her own belongings. Remember I told you I found Uncle's diary while sorting through his papers? She asked, approaching one of the cabinets. Well, I found not only the diary. She moved aside several books on the bottom shelf, and I saw a small safe built into the wall. Uncle Victor always loved hiding places, Olga smiled, entering a combination on the electronic lock. I discovered this one by accident when I was looking for a place to store the documents for the educational center. The safe opened with a quiet click. Inside lay an antique box made of dark wood with inlay work. What is this? I asked when Olga carefully took it out and placed it on the table. Another part of the inheritance, she replied, gently opening the lid. Look. The box contained letters, dozens of letters in yellowed envelopes, tied with faded ribbons. On top was an envelope with the inscription to Olga. Open after the wedding. A second letter? I asked in surprise. Yes, Olga nodded. I found it yesterday but decided to save it for today. Would you like to read it together? I nodded, and Olga carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a sheet of paper covered with Uncle Victor's same precise handwriting. Dear Olga, if you are reading this letter, it means the first stage of your journey is complete. You have found yourself, your calling, and the person with whom you are ready to share your life. Now I can entrust you with another secret of our family. In this box are letters from Anna Kravtsova to her younger sister Elizaveta. They span the period from 1780 to 1825, Anna's entire adult life. In them, she tells not only about events at the royal court but also about her most intimate thoughts, fears, and hopes. These letters have been passed down in our family from generation to generation through the female line. My mother, your grandmother, was the last keeper. She gave them to me shortly before her death with instructions to find a worthy successor. I always knew it would be you. Among the letters, you will find mentions of the medallion and the role it played in Anna's life. Perhaps these letters will help you better understand not only our family's past but also your own purpose. Study them, cherish them, and when the time comes, pass them on to your daughter or a worthy successor, as the women of our lineage have done for generations. With love and faith in you, Uncle Victor. Olga finished reading and looked at me with wide-open eyes. Do you understand what this means? These aren't just letters. This is a direct voice from the past, spanning almost half a century of Anna's life. I carefully took one of the envelopes. It was dated May 15, 1785, and addressed to Elizaveta Kravtsova. This is a real treasure, I whispered. The historical value of such documents is enormous. Not just historical, Olga said, gently sorting through the letters. It's a personal, family treasure. An opportunity to hear the voice of a woman who lived more than 200 years ago, but whose blood flows in my veins, in Misha's veins. We sat in the study until late at night, carefully reading the first few letters. Anna's handwriting was elegant, with flourishes characteristic of that era, but quite legible. She wrote vividly, humorously describing court intrigues, new dresses, balls. But behind the social chatter emerged a sharp mind, observant nature, and ability to see right through people. Dear Lisa, she wrote in one of her letters, you ask if I am bored at court among all these ceremonies and conventions. I confess, sometimes I want to throw off my heavy court dress and run into the forest, as we did in childhood. But I have found a way to remain myself even here. The secret is to wear a mask so skillfully that no one will guess your true thoughts, but never forget who you really are. She was a remarkable woman, I said when we finished reading the third letter. Such wisdom, such depth. And such a similar situation, Olga quietly added. She also wore a mask, pretended in order to survive in her world. Just like me in my marriage with Sergei. There was a gentle knock at the door, and Andrei entered. It's late already. Is everything all right? Olga showed him the box with letters and the second letter from Uncle Victor. He listened with admiration. This is amazing. Authentic letters from the era of Catherine the Great. And they belonged to your great-great-grandmother. Our great-great-grandmother, Olga corrected, taking his hand. Now this is our shared history. We decided it was time to go to bed. Tomorrow would be the first day of Olga's new life, not just as Uncle Victor's heir, but as the keeper of a family history that stretched back through the centuries. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of music. Looking out the window, I saw Olga, Andrei, and Misha having breakfast on the veranda. They looked like a family that had always been together. Their interaction seemed so natural. Misha was enthusiastically telling something, gesturing with his hands. Andrei was listening attentively, and Olga was watching them with such happiness in her eyes that I had never seen in her before. I joined them, and Misha immediately boasted, Aunt Lena, Andrei and I decided to make a special display case for the ring and the medallion, so that all the children at the center could see them and know our family's history. That's an excellent idea, I approved, accepting a cup of coffee from Olga. But not today, Olga smiled. Today we have other plans. After breakfast, Andrei and Misha went to the garden. The boy wanted to show his stepfather his secret project that he had been creating with other children from the center. Olga and I remained alone. You know, she said, watching the retreating figures, I never thought I would be this happy. After everything that happened with Sergei, I was certain I would never be able to trust men again. But Andrei is different, I remarked. It's not just about him, Olga shook her head. It's about me. I've changed. Before, I was looking for protection in relationships, support, thought that without a man I was incomplete. But now. She paused. Now I know that I can manage on my own. And precisely because of this, I can allow myself to love not out of fear or dependency, but from a position of strength. There was such wisdom in her words that I couldn't help thinking about Anna Kravtsova. I wondered if she had come to the same understanding in her life. And what do you plan to do with the letters? I asked. Will you study them yourself or involve historians? Both, Olga replied. First, I want to read them all myself, establish a chronology, understand the complete picture. Then, possibly, I'll show them to specialists, but only selected fragments. Some things should remain family secrets. She was silent for a moment, then added more quietly, you know, I think I'll find answers to many questions in these letters. Not just about the past, but also about the future. About the future? I asked, surprised. Yes, Olga nodded. About how to continue Uncle Victor's work. How to preserve and multiply not only the material inheritance, but also the spiritual one. At that moment, Misha ran up to us, his eyes shining with excitement. Mom. Andrei said we can go on a real archaeological expedition next summer. Where the Kravtsov estate used to be. Really? Olga looked at Andrei as he approached. If you don't mind, he smiled. My colleague is conducting excavations in that area. They found the foundation of an old estate which, according to documents, might have belonged to the Kravtsov family in the early 19th century. Of course I don't mind, Olga hugged her son. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect with our history. I watched them, mother, son, and the man who had become a reliable support for both of them, and thought about how amazingly the spiral of fate sometimes unfolds. Who could have imagined 3 years ago that Uncle Victor's inheritance would lead not only to Olga's financial independence but also to finding a new family, a new purpose in life, and a new understanding of her roots. After lunch, the guests began to leave. I was also planning to return to the city. I had work waiting at the language school where I taught in addition to my classes at Olga's educational center. You absolutely must come next weekend, Olga said, walking me to my car. We'll start going through Anna's letters. I can't manage without you, your French is much better than mine, and some of the letters seem to be written in French. Of course I'll come, I hugged my friend. You know I wouldn't miss such an adventure. When I was already getting into the car, Olga suddenly said, Lena, thank you. For everything. For being there during the most difficult moments. For believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I squeezed her hand. You would have done the same for me. You know, she smiled with that special smile that had appeared only after she received her inheritance. I think Uncle Victor was right. True wealth isn't in money or property. It's in the people who are beside you. In the history behind you. In knowing who you really are. I nodded, unable to utter a word because of the emotions that overwhelmed me. The journey to Moscow took about an hour. The whole way I was thinking about Olga, about her remarkable transformation from a frightened, insecure woman into a strong individual who knows her worth. About how Uncle Victor's inheritance became for her not just material support, but a key to her true self. I recalled the words from Uncle's letter, true wealth is not in possessions, but in the ability to remain true to yourself even when the whole world demands otherwise. Olga managed to find this fidelity to herself, managed to recognize in herself those qualities that Uncle Victor saw in her. And perhaps this was his greatest gift, not the money and property, but his belief in her, in the knowledge that one day she would become a worthy keeper not only of Anna Kravtsova's medallion, but also of her spirit, her strength, her wisdom. The following weekend, as we had agreed, I came to the estate. Olga greeted me with shining eyes. She had already started reading Anna's letters and couldn't wait to share her discoveries. You won't believe it, she said, leading me to the study, where letters were neatly arranged on a large table, sorted by date. Anna wasn't just a lady-in-waiting. She carried out special assignments for the Empress. Something like a secret diplomat. I'll translate the text into English while preserving its literary style and structure. For the next few hours, we immersed ourselves in a world from 2 centuries ago. Anna's letters to her sister were surprisingly candid. She wrote about court intrigues, secret missions entrusted to her by Catherine, and about her own doubts and fears. Dear Liza, she wrote in one of the letters dated 1787, the Empress summoned me again last night. She trusts me more and more, which is both flattering and frightening. The latest assignment is particularly delicate. I must meet with an envoy from the Austrian court and deliver a message whose contents even the Chancellor is unaware of. I am afraid, sister, but I cannot refuse. Not only out of loyalty to the sovereign but also out of curiosity. What woman would decline the opportunity to influence the course of history, even if secretly? Incredible, I whispered, setting the letter aside. She was a genuine secret agent. And that's not all. Olga handed me another letter, a later one. Read this. The letter was dated December 1796, shortly after Catherine's death and Paul I's ascension to the throne. Dear Lisa, my situation has become dangerous. The new emperor suspects everyone who was close to his mother. Yesterday, Count M. was arrested, and today I learned that my name is also on the list of those suspected of anti-state sentiments. Pyotr insists that we leave for the countryside immediately, and I am forced to agree, although my heart breaks at the thought of abandoning the cause I have served for so many years.